Hi, Philosophy71, and let's talk about Plato and his attitude towards women. So, Plato was born in 428 BCE. He died in 347 BCE, and everything that he wrote was about Socrates. Everything we know about Socrates was written by Plato. Socrates was Plato's teacher. So, we have writings throughout Plato's career where he's writing about Socrates and he puts everything into the word or the mouth of Socrates. In other words, his writing is in dialogue form. And it says Socrates said blah, blah, blah. Then Glaucon said blah, 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 and so forth. So it's a dialogue. And that was a common practice of writing 2,500 years ago, because the idea was that you didn't put forth your own ideas. You didn't put forth your own thoughts. What you did was you put forth the ideas of your mentors, your teachers. And so it was a way of showing respect. Because of that, we can't really separate Socrates from Plato. We talk about Socrates and say Socrates said this, and then we talk about Plato and say, well, Plato wrote this, but really it's hard to tell. Most scholars agree that the early writings of Plato were the ideas of Socrates, and the later writings of Plato were the ideas of Plato himself. There's a middle period where he wrote a book called The Republic, and it is a mixture of ideas of Socrates and Plato. It looks to most scholars that the idea that of the perfect city actually comes from Socrates. So, in a little bit of background about this book, the book is called The Republic, and it is talking about, um, uh, or it is written about Socrates' search for justice. And in his search for justice, he tries to figure out what a just person is. And then in order to try and do that, he wants to figure out what a just city is. So he is going to give us his outline, his guideline on justice. But why are we talking about it here in A Course in Feminism? Well, um, one of the problems with philosophy, and particularly with the ancient Greek philosophies, is that they were sexist. They were actually more misogynistic than anything. Misogyny is not just sexism, it is a hatred towards women. So many of them, especially Plato, viewed women as an unnecessary, or pardon me, as a necessary evil. Now, in the Republic, Socrates says that we should train women to be rulers if they have the right kind of soul. Plato does not like the idea, but of course he's writing about what Socrates said. This idea that women with the right kind of soul should be rulers or trained as rulers is something that in modern times, contemporary times, has caused people to look at Plato's writing and say Plato was the first feminist. So here's the thing. Here's why I wrote this paper. All throughout college and graduate school and postgraduate and so on, I was reading Plato. I've read everything Plato ever wrote that we have in English, and a good chunk of it in the original Greek. And so I'm very familiar with a lot of what he has to say. And he says a lot of really hateful things about women. He repeats that women are weaker than men in every way, that women need to be watched over and controlled like children and animals, that women should not be on their own and free to do anything because they just don't have the an intellect or the moral capability to live a good life. So I'm reading this left and right throughout college about Plato's view on women, and I'm thinking, well, he's just really, really misogynistic. But at the same time, I'm reading articles that are contemporary articles, and people saying things like Plato was the first feminist, and I could not reconcile the two views. I'm like, how can you say this man was a feminist when he is so awful in his thoughts and treatment of women? So that's why I wrote this paper. I spent a sabbatical in the fall of 2017 researching, rereading everything Plato had ever written, and really looking at his views on women. So Plato writes in the Republic Socrates' idea about women possibly being a ruler. And then before and after in his writings, he just takes women to task and says, he says things like this. This is one of my favorite. He says, men are made by the gods, but women are reborn men who were cowardly in their previous life, and so in this life they were put into the body of a woman so that her soul and her body matched up. So women are born out of inferior men, and it's a type of punishment that because we were cowardly and weakly, that in this life we have punishment and we must live the life of a woman. And the life of a woman in ancient Athens was not a pleasant life unless you were very wealthy and you had a number of household slaves and other slaves. um, but if you were not part of the aristocracy, then your life was very harsh. And always, regardless of your class, you were subjugated to whatever your father or husband wanted. So again, not a pleasant place to live. So what's going on here in the Republic? Well, briefly, in the Republic, Socrates is saying that in order to have the ideal and just city, we need to create three groups of people. We have the bottom group, which would be what he calls the artisans. Um, these are people that are, weavers and shoemakers and so forth. Then we have a class above them that are the guardians, and these are the warriors, basically. They are there to protect the artisans, and in exchange, the artisans donate a certain amount of their goods, shoes if they are a shoemaker, clothing if they're a cloth maker, that kind of thing, to the guardians. So the guardians get paid through what is essentially a taxation system. And then in order to keep the guardians in check and on the right track, they have a third class, the class of rulers. And that's a very small group, and they also get their food and clothing and so forth provided by the artisans. So we have a hierarchy. You have the people who are producing goods, whether it is making shoes or growing plants or taking care of the animals, and all of the merchants and all of the fisher people, all of that. And then you have the guardians, and all they do is act as a police or military force. And then the rulers who tell the guardians, what to go protect, or who to fight, those kind of things. So we've got three classes. Now, during this discussion about these three classes and how we need to have a stratified system, Socrates says everyone should stay in their class and do what they are assigned according to their soul. In other words, you are put into a certain class based on your soul. The soul that you have is suited to do certain things. Some souls are suited to rule, some souls are suited to make shoes. And whatever yours is suited for, that's the class you belong in. And to try and step out of that class is the worst possible thing you could do. Well, Socrates is talking to a man named Glaucon, and Glaucon is agreeing that this sounds like a good city, but then he asks the question, he's kind of messing with Socrates, and he says, look, what happens if that soul, that is the soul of the ruler, or the soul of a guardian, what if that is inside a woman? And Socrates says, well, I mean, he laughs and he says, well, here's what we need to do. And I know people are going to laugh at this. He says, but if a person has a guardian soul, they should be a guardian regardless of the body that carries that soul around. So if a woman has a soul that is fit to be a ruler or a guardian, she should be trained as a ruler or a guardian. Essentially, he also looks at what group you're born into. Like if you were an artisan, um, your parents are artisans, and you were probably, you have the soul of an artisan. However, he allows that there might be people who are born to artisans who would have the soul of a guardian or a ruler, and they should be taken as children and trained to be guardians and rulers. Likewise, you might have people who are rulers or guardians or born into ruler or guardian families and aren't suited for those jobs, and so they get taken down and given to an artisan family. So the idea here is, how do we make the best organized, the best run, and the most just city? We do it according to your soul. Everyone's soul is suited to a particular job. Everyone needs to follow that part of their soul. And when we do that, we will have a well organized, high functioning society where people are doing jobs that they like, that they are good at, and will have quality products. Because if you have a soul that is suited to make shoes, right, you will make quality shoes and you will enjoy doing it. If you are a guardian and your soul is suited to rule, pardon me, not rule, but to fight, you have a warrior soul, and you are forced to make shoes, you're not going to make good shoes, right? It's just not part of who you are. So by sticking to our souls and sticking to that job designation, we will have a much better society. They go on to talk about society in general, but the point here is that this is the part where people have said, oh, Plato was a feminist. He's willing to allow women to be rulers or guardians. And he says, well, if a woman has the soul of a guardian, she should be trained in battlefield skill. She should be trained to fight. She should be trained, to do the job of a warrior. Same if she's born with a soul that is fit to be a ruler. She should be trained from childhood to be a ruler. Again, this is where everybody says, oh, he's a feminist. Well, I argue that he is not a feminist. And I think if you've read the paper, which I hope you already have, you'll see the many points I make. But the many points come down to a main idea. Plato, or Socrates, does not care about women. He cares about the proper use of the soul. The soul does not have a sex. The body has sex. The soul does not. And it's the proper use of the soul that he cares about. So if a warrior soul is born into a male or a female, that soul, now in that body, should be trained as a warrior. It's not about women. It's not about men, really. It's about the soul. The soul must be cared for. The soul must be um, focused on what it is supposed to do. It has a mission, you might say. And so we need to follow that. We need to use the soul efficiently. And that is why he's willing to say women could be rulers. Now, bear in mind many of the other things that he says. I mean, he says, if a woman has a soul of a ruler, then she could become, or then she should be trained as a ruler. But that if is a big if. Because if you think about the fact that Socrates and Plato both thought that a weak man was reborn, a weak-souled man was reborn in next life as a woman, then how's that woman going to be born as a warrior, right? She was weak as her soul is weak, right? She was a weak man and now she's a woman, so she's not going to have that warrior soul or that ruler soul. So the chances of there actually being a woman who could be a warrior or a ruler are very, very slim. On top of that, Socrates is concerned about the city and protection of the city. I mean, to a certain extent, he's saying, look, at the very top, we have the men who have the ruler's soul. Below them, we have the women who have the ruler's soul. Below them are the men with the warrior soul, and below them are the women with the warrior soul. Then we have the men with the artisan soul, and then the women with the artisan soul. So if we go up here to the rulers, let's say if all of the men get wiped out, the male rulers get wiped out, it's more efficient to have a female with the ruler soul take over rule than to have a man with a warrior soul take over. Now, of course, if she were to get wiped out, or the last woman were to get wiped out, then the silver-souled male would take over ruling, and if they all got wiped out, then the warrior souled women would uh, would take over, and so on down the line. I mean, Socrates' desire, and Plato's desire as well, is to have defense for the city in a way that the last grandma standing should be able to, pull a sword and fight for her city. So we've got a hierarchy that is designed to protect the city, to make sure that the city thrives. And sometimes, if there are ineffective men or no men to do the particular job of ruling, a woman should do it. A woman who has the right kind of soul. So is this a feminist attitude? No, because again, it has nothing to do with women. It is saying that women can be trained and that there would be a certain amount of equality, but they're still going to be below men. I mean, we still have the ruler men ranking above the ruler women, so there's no equality there. The ruler women are only above the warrior men and the warrior women and the artisan men and women, but we don't have an actual equality at the very top ranks. We don't have the equality of economics or society, and we don't have the we don't have the equality of politics. We don't have the economic, I keep tripping over my tongue today. We don't have the equality of uh, the freedom of being a woman. Now that's a whole kind of new aspect of this discussion. You see, because one of the things that Socrates is saying is that this equality, so-called equality between men and women based on their soul, is allowing women to act like men. In other words, there are characteristics of the warrior and the characteristics of the ruler that are defined in terms of masculinity, right? And so a woman who is a ruler or a warrior has the freedom, you could say, the right to act like a man and be those masculine ideals of ruler and warrior. So that's not working either. We've got just, many different spots where the idea of what it means to be a feminist and what it means to be a warrior or a ruler and what Plato is saying, they just don't line up, right? Nowhere is there a case that would say, a woman who was a ruler can also have her own children because, a little side part here, Plato believed that, or Socrates believed, they both did, that in this ideal city, that children should be taken away from their mothers if the mothers are either rulers or warriors, and taken away and raised in an orphanage. And the reason he wants that to happen is that there won't be any bias, he says. It's like if you are a ruler and you don't know what your child is or who your child is, right? You won't make any rules based on what's going on with that child. In the same way, he said you can't have rulers and warriors can't own houses or property. What happens is if you're a ruler and you know your house that you own and your family that you have is over there, and the army, the enemy is attacking from over there and over there, what are you going to do? Well, if your family's over there, your house is over there, and it's your house, you're probably going to send more support to that side rather than the other side because you're going to be biased in favor of your own activities. So warriors and rulers owned nothing. They had things, and it was all given to them by the taxation system in the or from the artisans, but they didn't own it, right? And they didn't marry. They could have as many partners as they wanted. At least the men could. So there's another inequality, right? In fact, uh, he recommended that especially brave men after a battle should be given as many women as they can handle in hopes of creating babies with many of those women and furthering the children who will become warriors, right? And keeping the population going. So he doesn't say that women who are brave in battle should have as many men as they want, right? It's men should be given as many women as they want. But regardless of the number, none of them form permanent relationships, and no one knows who their children are. None of the rulers or warriors know who their children are, so that they won't be biased. So, a woman who might be a ruler or a warrior is not free to know who the child is that she gave birth to, the child that she carried for 9 months. These things are taken away from her. Again, she has been given the freedom and equality to act like a man, but not to be a woman. And that alone makes this a non-feminist theory. He is saying, look, women could be equal, but not women. Right? Um, it is very forward thinking, I guess you could say, for the time, and the fact that women were more than just property in this new ideal city that he's proposing. But it's not feminist, and I wish people would stop referring to him as the first feminist. So read the paper if you haven't already. Enjoy it, and we will move on. To Allison Jagger. One of the things about this paper, though, let me just wrap up and say that one of the reasons you are getting it in this class is because we're starting off with Plato and then some writing by Allison Jagger that help us understand the origins of sexism and misogyny and how philosophy did a lot to cause that sexism and misogyny. So we'll look at some causes here before we move on to possible solutions. Okay, I think that's it for now, and I'll see you next time.